Let me tell you something that might sting a little. Just because he's acting like you don't matter doesn't mean you don't. People pretend. They fake being fine. They ghost. They avoid. They stay silent. Not because they've moved on, but because they don't know how to deal with what they feel. And guess what? If you're still in his head, he's not as done as he pretends to be. He's not ignoring you because you didn't mean anything to him. He's silent because staying quiet is easier than facing what he feels. That silence, that cold shoulder, that ghosting, it's not closure, it's avoidance. People don't always shut down because they've moved on. A lot of times they shut down because they're overwhelmed by emotions they can't process. And instead of doing the hard thing, like owning their part, having an honest conversation, or admitting they still care, they disappear. They pull back. They pretend. This is one of the most painful truths about emotional disconnection. Silence doesn't mean indifference. It's a defense. It's protection. It's someone choosing comfort over truth. It's a way to avoid being vulnerable. Think about it. How many times have you been tempted to say something, to reach out, to tell someone how you really feel, but you stopped yourself because it felt too risky? Now imagine someone who has never learned how to process emotions, who feels shame about their own vulnerability, who equates emotional honesty with weakness. That's the person who chooses silence, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. And then here's where it messes with your head, because you're sitting there replaying everything, wondering why it suddenly went cold. You start asking yourself if you imagine the whole connection. You question your worth. You wonder if you said too much, did too much, cared too much. But what if I told you the silence isn't about you at all? What if I told you it's about him and his inability to deal with real emotion? Any two moments, this is the part people don't talk about. The person who seems fine, who seems distant, who looks like they've moved on, might actually be the one losing sleep at night. Because avoidance has a cost. You can suppress feelings for a while, but they don't disappear. They fester. And eventually, they show up in the most inconvenient ways. Overthinking, anxiety, sudden mood swings, unexpected anger, or guilt that won't go away. That's what's underneath the silence. That's what's underneath the fake indifference. Easy to believe that his silence means you didn't matter. That's the story your brain will tell you when it's desperate for answers. But silence doesn't equal peace. It doesn't equal closure. It doesn't equal moving on. Sometimes it's the loudest evidence that he's struggling, because when someone is truly at peace with a decision, they don't have to avoid it. They don't have to run from it. They don't have to pretend it didn't happen. But when someone's avoiding something, when they can't even say your name or talk about what went down, that's not strength, that's suppression. And here's something else. People don't forget genuine connection. They don't just erase it like a note on their phone. If you were real, if your connection had depth, then even if he's gone quiet, he remembers, he feels it. He's just choosing not to face it, maybe out of fear, maybe out of pride, maybe because he's never learned how to handle emotional conflict in a healthy way. But the silence isn't nothing. The silence is loaded. It's full of everything he's not saying, everything he doesn't know how to say, and everything he's hoping will just go away if he ignores it long enough. So when you hear nothing from him, don't assume that means nothing is happening inside him. Some of the loudest internal battles are fought in silence and pretending not to care. That's often just a mask, a very fragile one. Avoidance is often misunderstood. When someone shuts down or pulls away emotionally, the natural conclusion is to think they don't care. It looks like indifference. It feels like rejection. But what's really happening under the surface isn't as simple as detachment. It's often emotional overload. He's not avoiding you because you mean nothing. He's avoiding what he feels when he thinks about you. That's a big difference. And understanding that can shift the entire way you interpret his behavior. When a person is emotionally overwhelmed, their brain goes into a kind of shutdown mode. For some, it's fight or flight, and flight becomes the preferred option. They distance themselves. They go quiet. They distract themselves with work, other people, mindless entertainment, anything to keep from sitting still long enough to feel what's really going on inside. So when he avoids you, when he acts like you're invisible, that's not always a sign of emotional freedom. Sometimes it's a sign of emotional paralysis. He can't confront it, so he escapes it. Avoidance gives the illusion of control. It allows someone to delay dealing with truth. He might even convince himself that by not talking about you, not seeing you, not acknowledging the pain, he's moving on. But avoiding something doesn't resolve it, it buries it. And buried emotions don't die, they wait. They show up in triggers, in dreams, in random memories that pop up when you least expect them. They show up in songs, in places, in people who remind him of what he's pretending not to miss. That's the thing with avoidance. It doesn't heal, it hides. And hiding doesn't work forever. Here's something most people won't admit. Avoiding someone you once cared about takes effort. It requires discipline. It takes constant distraction and denial. If you were truly irrelevant, he wouldn't need to avoid you at all. He'd be indifferent, not intentionally distant. There's a big difference between someone who doesn't care and someone who's trying hard not to care. One is calm, the other is conflicted. And that conflict shows up in strange ways. He might get irritable when your name comes up. He might over-explain why he's so over it. He might start dating quickly just to prove a point, not to you, but to himself. These behaviors aren't coming from peace. They're coming from discomfort. That's what emotional overload does. It makes people act out of character. The person avoiding you is actually trying to avoid a part of himself. Maybe being around you made him feel vulnerable in ways he wasn't ready for. Maybe he felt seen, exposed, understood, and that scared him. Vulnerability, especially for someone who equates it with weakness or past pain, can feel like danger. So he pulls back, not just from you, but from that version of himself that showed up in your presence. The version that felt too deeply, the version that couldn't hide. That's the part he's really running from. Real emotional connection doesn't just disappear, it imprints. And unless someone has done the hard internal work to process, learn, and heal, that imprint lingers. So when he avoids the memory of you, the mention of you, or the space where you used to be in his life, he's not erasing anything. He's delaying the emotional reckoning. That's not peace. That's pressure building up under the surface. One day it cracks. One day it catches up. Not because of guilt or regret necessarily, but because the truth always demands to be felt eventually. That's the cost of avoidance. It gives you temporary relief, but guarantees long-term unrest. What he shows you is not the full story. It's a performance, a curated version of reality designed to look effortless, unbothered, and in control. People do this all the time, especially when emotions are high and pride is on the line. He may be acting like he doesn't care, like you're just another chapter he closed without hesitation. But the truth is, that's not the whole picture. It's a mask he wears. And the longer he wears it, the more convincing it becomes, not just to you, but to himself. We live in a world where showing emotion is often seen as weakness, especially for men. They're taught to be strong, to be stoic, to man up and move on. So when something impacts them deeply, like the loss of someone they actually cared about, they don't always know how to process it in a healthy way. Instead of sitting with it, talking through it, or expressing it, they shove it down. And what you get on the surface is someone who looks completely unaffected. Someone who posts as if nothing happened. Someone who jokes, who goes out, who dates, who thrives, or at least pretends to. But that's just the highlight reel. That's not the reality playing out in private. You don't see the late nights. You don't see the way certain songs hit differently now. You don't hear the way your name still comes up in his thoughts, even if it never comes up in his conversations. He's not showing you the parts that keep him up, the regret, the confusion, the what ifs. That's not part of the performance. And he won't post that. He won't text that. He might not even admit it to himself fully, but it's there underneath all the pretending. Because when someone meant something real to you, pretending they didn't doesn't actually erase the feelings. It just buries them. The people who seem the most over it on the outside, often the ones struggling the most internally. It's not that they're lying exactly. It's that they've convinced themselves the lie is safer than the truth. If he admits he still thinks about you, if he admits he misses the connection, if he admits that losing you stung more than he expected, he risks cracking that image he's trying so hard to maintain. And for someone who builds their identity around being in control, that crack feels like collapse. So he avoids it. He covers it up with ego, with distractions, with silence. You might even notice how defensive he gets when someone brings you up, how quick he is to change the subject, to act like you were just a phase, nothing serious. But that reaction alone tells you everything. Indifference doesn't need to prove anything. Indifference doesn't get triggered. If he were truly at peace, he wouldn't need to convince others or himself that he doesn't care. The fact that he's working so hard to look detached, that's evidence of the emotional weight he's still carrying. And this isn't about hoping he comes back or waiting for closure. It's about understanding human behavior for what it really is. Layered, messy, often contradictory. People are complex. Feelings don't just vanish because someone pretends they have. He may have chosen not to show you the impact you had on him, but that doesn't mean there wasn't one. He just doesn't want you to see it. Or maybe he doesn't want to admit it exists at all. Because once he does, the act is over. And then he has to face what's real. You're not crazy for feeling what you felt. You're not imagining the connection, the energy, or the emotional depth that existed between you and him. Just because he's acting like it didn't matter doesn't mean it wasn't real. That doubt you're feeling right now, that voice in your head saying maybe I overthought it or maybe I was too much, that's not truth speaking. That's emotional confusion caused by mixed signals and his sudden detachment. But the truth is, the connection was real. It just scared him more than it grounded him. And instead of leaning into it, he pulled away. Some people run not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much. Vulnerability can be terrifying for someone who has never been safe expressing their emotions. If he grew up believing feelings make you weak, or if he's been through situations where opening up led to pain or betrayal, then feeling deeply again doesn't feel good. It was dangerous. So even if he felt a strong emotional bond with you, it may have triggered something inside of him that said, this is too much, I don't know how to handle this. And instead of communicating that fear, he shut down, he backed out, he disappeared. You didn't misread the way he looked at you. You didn't misinterpret those conversations that lasted for hours or the way he lit up when he talked to you. You saw something real. And for a moment, he let himself feel it too. But when the emotions got intense, when it became clear that this wasn't just surface level attraction, he panicked. Maybe he feared being exposed. Maybe he wasn't ready for the version of himself that showed up with you, the version that couldn't hide behind sarcasm, detachment, or ego, because you saw through it. You saw him. And that kind of emotional exposure can make someone feel naked, unprotected, even threatened. What does he do? He distances himself. He convinces himself that you were just too much, or the timing was wrong, or the connection wasn't sustainable, but those are just excuses to escape the emotional weight. The irony is, the stronger the connection, the harder it can be for someone emotionally unavailable to stay. It's not your fault he didn't know how to hold it. That's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of his readiness or lack thereof. This is what people rarely say out loud. It's possible for someone to deeply care about you and still walk away. Not because you weren't enough, but because the relationship required a level of emotional maturity and honesty they weren't equipped to give. That's what makes this kind of situation so confusing. Because your heart felt something real, but his actions scream indifference. And when those two messages clash, it's easy to blame yourself than to believe that he was scared, that fear, avoidance, and emotional immaturity can all wear the mask of apathy. It's also important to understand that how someone leaves isn't always an accurate representation of what they felt while they were with you. People ghost, disconnect, and rewrite history to protect themselves. That doesn't mean the bond you shared was fake. It means that once real feelings got involved, his emotional capacity hit a limit. And instead of rising to meet you, he retreated into what felt safer: numbness, denial, and control. So no, you weren't crazy. You didn't overthink it. The connection was real. It was mutual. But mutual doesn't always mean permanent. And real doesn't always mean sustainable, especially when one person isn't ready to face what that kind of connection requires. Regret doesn't always look like an apology or a dramatic confession. Sometimes it hides in the silence. It lingers in the moments when he scrolls past your name on his phone but doesn't message you. It shows up in the way he checks your social media without saying a word. Regret can be subtle, quiet, and buried under layers of ego. And sometimes it doesn't surface until long after the damage is done. People don't always realize what they've lost when they walk away. Some lessons take time. And for someone like him, someone who didn't have the emotional tools to handle what you brought into his life, that realization doesn't happen overnight. It builds slowly. He probably felt relief at first, a sense of escape, no pressure to confront his feelings, no more emotional responsibility, no more mirrors showing him who he could be if he let himself grow. But that relief is temporary because something inside of him knows, even if he won't say it out loud, that he didn't walk away from chaos. He walked away from someone who genuinely cared, someone who saw him, someone who challenged him. And even if he's surrounded by people now, even if he's acting like he's moved on, there's a part of him that remembers. And that part starts to speak louder with time. Regret often begins in the quiet moments, not in the chaos of the breakup, but in the stillness that follows, when life slows down, when distractions fade, when he lies awake at night and realizes that the peace he thought he'd find in your absence is actually emptier than he imagined, because connection, real connection, doesn't just go away, it leaves fingerprints. And if you were real, if your love was grounded in truth, kindness, and vulnerability, then it's going to echo inside of him, whether he admits it or not. The hardest part about all of this is that you won't always see the regret. He might never reach out. He might never say, I was wrong. But just because someone doesn't say it, doesn't mean they're not feeling it. Pride is a powerful barrier. It keeps people stuck in patterns they don't even like. He might think reaching out would make him look weak, or he might believe too much time has passed. So instead, he carries that regret quietly. He wears it under the surface. It shows up in his hesitation, his distractions, his inability to form a deep connection with anyone else. There's a difference between missing someone and realizing you mishandled them. Regret lives in that second category. It's not just about longing for what was, it's about seeing, often too late, that you were given something meaningful and didn't know how to hold it. That realization hurts in a different way because once it hits, he can't undo it. He can't go back to the version of himself who didn't know what he was losing. And that kind of awareness creates a quiet torment, the kind that follows him no matter how much he tries to forget. Regret teaches in ways that nothing else can. It has a way of humbling people. It reveals the parts of themselves they tried to hide. And for someone like him, someone who thought he had all the time in the world to figure it out, the weight of that realization can be heavy. It may not change his behavior immediately. It might not bring him back into your life, but it will change something inside of him authentically. Because when someone truly sees the value of what they lost, even if they never say it, they feel it. And once they feel it, they can't unfilter it. That's the cost of real regret. The hardest part about walking away isn't leaving someone physically, but leaving them emotionally. When someone chooses to disconnect or break up, they're often not just walking away from a person. They're walking away from their own vulnerability, their own fears, and their own emotional baggage that they're unwilling or unable to confront. It's not necessarily that they don't care, they do, but they're so wrapped up in their own internal struggles, doubts, and unresolved issues that the idea of facing the real depth of connection becomes overwhelming. So they disconnect, they build walls, they retreat. For someone who isn't ready to open up, who doesn't know how to handle deep emotions, the act of walking away feels like self-preservation. It's easier to go cold, to shut things down, to avoid, rather than face what's uncomfortable. This isn't just about avoiding you. It's about avoiding the emotional responsibility that comes with truly connecting with another person. And the person who walks away, who distances themselves without truly processing or acknowledging their own feelings, isn't always doing it because they don't care. It's because they can't handle how much they care. One of the most painful truths is that sometimes people leave because they're not equipped to deal with the vulnerability of a real emotionally intense relationship. They don't know how to let someone in. They don't know how to share their true self. Maybe they've been hurt before. And maybe they've been let down, or maybe they've never had the tools to truly understand their own emotions. The result is a defense mechanism that feels like avoidance, but in reality, it's a cry for help. It's a sign that they don't know how to manage their own emotional chaos. It's easier to turn off the emotions, to shut them down and pretend they don't matter, than it is to face them. In these situations, it's not about you or what you did wrong. It's not even about whether the connection was strong enough to keep them around. It's about the internal battles they're fighting that you, as much as you may try, can't solve. People often project their internal struggles onto relationships. So when someone feels emotionally inadequate, they project that fear of inadequacy onto the relationship. They don't know how to show up as their authentic self, so they shut down, they disappear, and they hide behind this facade of indifference, believing it's the safer route. And this is where it gets even more confusing, because when someone disconnects in this way, you're left with all the unanswered questions. You're left wondering what went wrong, what you did or didn't do, and if you missed any signs. But the truth is, the person who walked away is just as confused as you are. They might not even fully understand why they did it. The fear of being vulnerable, the fear of facing what they feel, it's all wrapped up in emotions they've never learned to manage. And instead of facing that fear, they chose the only option that seems safer, leaving. But what they don't realize is that by walking away from you, they're not just walking away from the relationship, they're walking away from the opportunity to grow emotionally, to learn to be vulnerable, and to become a better version of themselves. The person who leaves doesn't always know that they're running from the most powerful thing that could actually help them heal, emotional honesty. And because they haven't learned to face that truth, they carry the weight of unresolved emotions wherever they go. Walking away doesn't give them closure. Even though it may seem like it does, it just leaves a void, a space where they can no longer deny that they didn't have the courage to face their own feelings. And that's where the emotional turmoil begins. Because eventually, when all the distractions and walls come down, they're left with the truth of their own emotional avoidance. And it's not a comfortable place to be. As we reflect on the intricacies of emotional connection, regret, and avoidance, it's important to remember that what we see on the surface often doesn't reflect the full truth. The pain of silence, the withdrawal of someone who seems indifferent, is not always a reflection of apathy or a lack of care. More often, it is a manifestation of fear, confusion, and emotional turmoil. We must not mistake the absence of words or actions for the absence of feeling. What we experience as distance may in fact be someone's attempt to protect themselves from vulnerability they are not yet ready to face. It's crucial that we approach these situations with understanding and compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. We all have our battles, our unresolved emotions, and our personal fears. And in relationships, these fears can sometimes drive us to act in ways that are not in alignment with our true desires or the love we genuinely feel. But let us not be defined by the silence or avoidance of others. Let us take this as an opportunity to grow, to better understand the complexities of the human heart, and to choose to love ourselves in the midst of confusion. The journey of emotional healing and growth is not linear, nor is it always immediate. But one thing is clear: when we are faced with emotional turmoil, when we feel rejected or abandoned, we must remember that it is not a reflection of our worth. Our value is not dependent on the actions of others, but on the love we have within ourselves and the strength to continue growing, no matter the circumstances. Let us learn from these experiences, but let us also forgive both ourselves and others and move forward with grace. For in the end, every connection we make teaches us something valuable about love, about vulnerability, and about the resilience of the human spirit.